It's that kind of time. We're going to be talking about war, wars of empire, wars of race, wars of gender, economic wars, surviving wars, wars of religious extremism, wars of imperialism. We're going to be talking about surviving wars abroad, surviving wars at home. So if I had just one message, it would be that let's wage a cultural revolution of spirit, which begins with the understanding that while we may not have won yet, we are a whole lot closer to winning than we were, and the other side is a whole lot closer to having lost. Relish revolutionary transformation, we're going to start with a cultural worker, an artist, a writer, a contributing editor for Vice, the illustrator of Matt Taibbi's book, The Divide. She's now working on a book, Brothers of the Gun, collaborating with two Syrians who have spent 2 years living under ISIS. I give you Molly Crabapple.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. Before I start this talk about state repression, I wanted to mention that 214 people were arrested on the January 20th protests during Trump's inauguration. They were kettled on the streets, they were rounded up, and they were charged with felony rioting. Several of the defendants are journalists, and they're facing up to 10 years in prison. And while we honor the former political prisoners that we have on this panel, like Oscar López Rivera and Sekou Odinga, we must fight to make sure that no one else ends up locked in a cage for their politics. Four months. It's been 4 months since the Tangerine Mussolini ascended to the White House. 4 months of attacks on the press, of fascists in the streets, of mothers of all bombs being dropped, of moms locked in immigration detention centers, and of climate agreements torched. 4 months of a news cycle that ping-pongs between horror and stupidity. 4 months during which our main prospect for salvation lies in the Trump regime's own blithering incompetence. 4 months of Steve Bannon's face. 4 months this bad, and it is easy to think that everything is doomed. And sometimes I let myself imagine a future where the last survivors are standing on the last meter of landfill that has not been swallowed by the rising seas. And they are screaming at each other in an endless, circular argument. You should have voted for Hillary. Bernie would have won. It's a pretty picture, right? Now, if we want to avoid this grim meat-hook future, the first step is realizing where we are. Trump might be the worst president we've ever had, but he isn't new. The deportations, the dead civilians, and the crony capitalism are all part of a system created by Democrats as much as Republicans. All reinforced by adult, bipartisan voices in respectable, badly cut suits. Our president, send them all to jail. Our president is working within an infrastructure bequeathed to him by past administrations, Democrat and Republicans. Remember, Trump is not a builder. He is not a builder of skyscrapers and not of gulags. He just makes money licensing his name. And you know what else isn't new here? What isn't new is Trump's authoritarianism. Now, Trump might be a soft little rich boy, but he is a bloated pea in the Duterte, Erdogan, Putin, Orban pod. Trump is just following a trend towards fascism. Under pressure, countries are turning inwards. They're turning towards strong men, looking for someone to blame. They are dropping bombs and hardening borders, launching raids and building walls. And maybe the only thing that is unique about Trump is that he's all stick and no carrot. He seeks to destroy those aspects of the state that might help its citizens, while bolstering the state's prisons, its deportations, its repression. And even those Pepe-loving brown shirts in the streets aren't unique to Trump. They're the same sort of fascist barnacles that demagogues always gather around them. The same legions of violent men and women with nothing to offer the world but their victim complexes, their unflattering flag-themed costumes, and the sticks that they smash over protesters' heads. Trump follows an old playbook. He hammers away at the false dichotomy beloved by all of these strutting, puffing strongmen. Like him, they divide their countries into the real people and the fake people. The fake people, that category, usually encompasses ethnic minorities, impoverished refugees, or decadent urban elites. The real people? Now here the trumpets paint a fine picture. The real people are the supposedly decent, humble, pious, patriotic. But most importantly, they are the silent, or were silent, until the moment that the authoritarian stepped onto the stage. And at this point, they exist primarily to stand and clap behind him. They wave the flags. He is the voice. You, the American people, are our last line of defense against the media's hit jobs, Trump wrote a few months ago in one of his daily money-hustling emails. The media are not the people. The people who didn't vote for Trump, they're not actually people either. We in this room, we are not real people. We are fake, 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 every last one of us. We do not exist in the Trump world. Now here I want to talk about my own profession for a bit. I am a triple fake. I'm a New Yorker, I'm a journalist, and worst of all, lowest of all, I'm an artist. To the authoritarian, artists are never real people. We are always part of that fake, impure, decadent, and disgusting elite. Now, authoritarians, and Trump is an authoritarian, authoritarians are liars. But like most good liars, they flavor their bullshit with a grain of truth. Historically, artists and power have gone together like butter and bread. We are the gilders of lilies, the court painters of Versailles. All too often, artists have been like Fabergé egg makers, pretending to be revolutionaries. We say a lot of liberal things, and sure, but we exclude the vast majority of people just by the language we use, the rooms we stand in, the ticket prices we charge to enter. We make inscrutable art clothed in inscrutable theory. The art world is but a small sliver in the vast wide earth of people moved by beauty. And in America, artists wonder why so many of those outside the art world seem so indifferent or even hostile to us. But many artists have long since turned our back on them. Or worse, we never considered them in the first place. And this is what we need to remember. For art to mean anything under authoritarians, whether they're in government or whether they're merely men with guns, for art to mean anything, it cannot spend all its time playing into authoritarians' greatest trope. Artists cannot ensconce themselves in wealthy or liberal enclaves. They cannot cede public space to the bigoted, the idiotic, and the craven. Art must go out into the streets, and it must speak to all classes of people in all sorts of communities. It must break out of the art world, because the world is too big and art is too ambitious for any art world to contain it. Art cannot keep being a mere status marker or luxury object. The bloated strongmen want to say artists are an irrelevant elite, but we must prove them wrong. Art is for everyone. Our enemy wants to lock us in a box, and I will be damned if we jump willingly inside. Art must be braver. Art must dare more. Art must be both a refuge and a weapon. Some of the best art is threatening art, but art threatens no one as long as it is entombed in safe spaces where only those who agree with it will see it. Worse, as long as it stays there, it remains inaccessible for those isolated rebels who need it most. Art needs to be out in the world, whispering, seducing, mocking, instilling us with empathy, showing us the world that is far more complicated, far more painful and dazzling than we ever could have imagined. And maybe you think now that I'm putting too much responsibility on art. After all, these are dangerous times. The pen is not mightier than the sword, let alone the predator drone. Our books do not stop bullets. Paintings cannot draw their way through prison bars. But as disappointment and violence spread, the antidote is a generosity that art, at its best, can inspire. Because art is hope against cynicism, creation against entropy. To make art is an act of both love and defiance. And though I'm a cynic, I believe these things are all we have. And what I say here for artists goes for everyone. There is no space now for retreat. Either we confront not just Trump, but all that he represents, the authoritarianism, the racism, the misogyny and kleptocracy, or we will be dealing with creatures far worse than Trump later. In a chaotic, interconnected, and rapidly shifting world, many people want two things. They want identity and they want daddy. They long for a leader who promises not just to keep them safe, fed, and emotionally validated, but who says that he will accomplish these things by punishing the imagined other, the impure, foreign, unreal source of all his homeland's humiliations. And this Trump provides. Trump, a man who cannot govern, is in perpetual campaign mode. He pouts his lips and whips up his crowds against the other. And violence, state or freelance, becomes his defense of the modest, good, forgotten, real American majority. Now, of course, this silent, real American majority doesn't exist, and neither does this other. They're stock figures in an authoritarian's playbook, substitutes for solutions in our complex, impure, and interwoven world. Economic justice is just the first step to beating fascists, orange-colored or otherwise. But the second step? The second step is we need to fight for each other, every last one of us. And I don't mean here to tolerate, like one tolerates a pair of painful high heels, but to proudly say that this world belongs to all of us and that we are not going anywhere. Ethno-nationalists are escaping from neoliberalism's cracks, just as they crawled forth from the rot of 19th century empires, and they are singing the same false and bloody tune. On the page, in art, on our walls, and on the streets, we must write better stories. Our moment is now.
Molly Crabapple, everybody. Molly's book is Drawing Blood. It looks like this. I'm next going to introduce somebody I felt was, I've known as a colleague for many years, an effective and incisive media critic, and at the same time a media maker, a man who, faced with the wrongs of the money-driven media empire, created his own alternative voice and has risen to become one of the most outstanding alternative voices in our progressive movement. Glen Ford spent many, many years in the media, former Washington Bureau, White House, Capitol Hill reporter for various different outlets. He then launched the Black World Report and the Black Agenda Report, and he's currently the executive director of the latter. Glen Ford.
Power to the people. Now, I always say power to the people, and it's not because I have nostalgia for a movement of the previous era. I say that to keep myself focused on the mission. And the mission is the transformation of society. And you accomplish that mission by defeating those forces that disempower the people and that threaten our species with extinction. This evening, our job is to discuss the rise of movements that challenge repressive institutions and discourses. Any kind of discussion like that has to talk about who is the enemy and what is the enemy up to and what are the people's forces doing about that enemy and his shenanigans. Who are the allies and who are the potential allies of the people. And we have to decide what forces can usefully be called part of the people's movement. Is there broad agreement among the various sectors of what people are calling a people's movement? Is there broad agreement on principles? Or instead, is there a general state of confusion? The Left Forum is the biggest gathering of its kind of leftists in the United States. And so we're obligated, I think especially since it's a yearly affair, to talk about what happened over the past year that may have made a real profound change in the state of the movement. This past year has seen huge developments. These have been history-shaking events, and I think history will tell us that. Events that have had a very deep impact on the political landscape and an impact on the prospects of defeating the main enemy of humanity. And of course, that main enemy is US imperialism in its global and its domestic manifestations. And those global and domestic manifestations are not just interrelated, they are inextricable. You cannot separate them. I believe that the most far-reaching development in the past year has been the destabilization of the duopoly political system in the United States, and that has resulted in the Democratic Party becoming, and I'm stealing somebody else's quote here, the Democrats becoming the truly explicit party of the ruling class in the United States. And as such an explicitly ruling class party, the Democratic Party has been definitively become the most aggressive war party. This definitive war party coalesced. We actually saw it come together this past election season, and it came together in that big nasty tent that Hillary Clinton used as a headquarters in her campaign. Trump disrupted, or at least temporarily defeated, the Republican Party's establishment. But that's not what really upset and put into panic the ruling class. He also assembled a mass movement, and that mass movement was brought together based on what seemed to be his promise to create an even more virulently white, racist, white man's party than the Republican Party has been since at least 1964 with Barry Goldwater's campaign, and certainly since 1968 with Richard Nixon. However, virulent racism in the Republican Party has not upset the ruling class. It has not driven them mad. It has not led to a destabilization of the duopoly. The ruling class has been quite fine with having one party whose principle in terms of organizing the masses is white supremacy, and having another one in which the other folks are in. And it funds both of them. So that's not what destabilized the US duopoly system. What destabilized the system was when Mr. Trump, rhetorically at least, made noises about lessening tensions with Russia and ending US regime change policies. And he also made noises about doing something about the free flow of money and jobs to foreign destinations, which seemed to ruling class ears to link him in some kind of alignment with the insurgency that was going on in the Democratic Party with Bernie Sanders. It was Donald Trump's lack of trustworthiness, however, on foreign policy that was really key to the panic that set in among the ruling class. And when I say the ruling class, I mean as represented in the establishment Republican Party as well as in the Democratic Party. Donald Trump was not seen as being trustworthy on the issue of continuing U.S. war policies, and that made him into anathema for the bulk of the ruling class. And especially, it made him anathema to the spooks and the spies and the assassins and the regime changers of the intelligence services, but also to those people who these spooks and spies and assassins work, whose missions these assassins are carrying out. The profoundness of the shift that occurred, this flocking of the ruling class into Hillary Clinton's tent, can be seen, I think, best with the way the corporate media behave. The corporate media does not have an independent existence in the United States. It is not some other estate out there that somehow functions based upon its own compass. It is owned by finance capital, and it operates as the voice of the ruling class. The ruling class uses the corporate media to argue out its differences. The people have to have alternative media in order to have a righteous conversation about what they would like to happen in society. And so when we see, as we saw, this unprecedented shift of basically the totality of the corporate media into Hillary Clinton's camp, into the Democratic camp, and their almost universal opposition to Donald Trump, that was the most visible indication that the ruling class was upset about Donald Trump. And what were they upset about? I said before, it was not his racism. That's been fine with the ruling class. It was his position, or what they thought was his position, or their anxiety about what his position might be on the continuation of the war policies. And we're talking about the war policies that date from 2011 with Barack Obama. Barack Obama's mission was to rebuild not just the U.S. image in the world, and he did that with his face and his charm, but actually to reposition the U.S. military to once again try to seize control of this whole energy-rich region, not just Iran, not just Syria, but to project U.S. power deep into Central Asia, and with the aim of establishing U.S. control over that area so that in a future confrontation, an inevitable confrontation with China, the rising economic power, the United States would be able to strangle or threaten to strangle China, to threaten to deny it access to that part of the world, and thereby continue U.S. dominance even as U.S. economic power and other power shrinks. So this is what George Bush was up to in 2003, and he failed, he was defeated. Barack Obama's mission was to try it again, and that's what was set in motion in 2011. And it has to be understood that for the ruling class, and they spend millions and millions of dollars funding think tanks, and they have access to supercomputers, and they're not, even if they're stupid, they hire people who are not. And they see the handwriting on the wall, and they know what time that clock is ticking towards. And so they see this battle, this military mission that they're on in what we in general call the Middle East, as being part of an existential struggle. They believe that if they do not put this stranglehold on this part of the world and somehow put themselves in a position to coerce themselves into a continued dominance that they are through, and they are probably right. And that is what propels them into war. And this feeling that they are in an existential struggle is what caused the panic and this alignment after the destabilization of the Republican Party that has created this maelstrom, this Niagara Falls of the Russians are somehow destabilizing us. It is basically, simply a war cry. That's what this is about. And you are making a fundamental misreading of events if you believe that the Russians did it mania has something to do just with jockeying position for the Democratic Party to gain some kind of advantage. Of course the Democratic Party wants to gain advantage. All parties do. But that's not what the ruling class is upset about. The ruling class is intent that its United States military offensive keeps moving on. And here's something that really shocked them during Trump's campaign. When he said those words that so upset the ruling class, that, we shouldn't do so much regime change. Maybe we can get along with Russia. It was expected that his constituency, his base, what we usually call middle America, which is a euphemism for white folks out there, that this group of people was the bulwark of the American pro-war party, or at least the party that could always be whipped up into a war frenzy at the drop of a hat. The people out there who have Nukem and just fill in the blanks as their bumper sticker. So when Donald Trump addressing exactly that cohort of people, when they did not bat an eye, when he was talking about what sounded like peaceful coexistence, and they didn't bat an eye when he was talking about stopping all this overthrowing of people for no reason, that really scared the hell out of the ruling class, and especially the national security establishment. Because if Trump's people were not wedded to war at the drop of the hat, then where is the constituency for war? And this told them a lesson, that if they wanted to keep the country at war fever, they were going to have to work at it. They were going to have to gin this up every day. They couldn't just rely upon the middle Americans that they had relied on to somehow just be ready to jump into regime change and war with Russia anytime they gave a dog whistle. They had to work at it. And now I think we can understand where the Russians are colluding with Trump and trying to wreck our democracy, and this unprecedented screaming noise every day, every hour about the Russians. I'm 67 years old. I remember a piece of the McCarthy era. I remember the House Un-American Activities Committee. I remember the TV show I Led 3 Lives, which was about nefarious secret communists doing all kinds of daring things. There was never anything like the decibel level, the frequency, the insanity, the madness of this anti-Russian campaign that we hear right now. This is a sign of a ruling class in panic. And I guess we're supposed to be, if we really are good leftists, we're supposed to be happy because the ruling class is in panic. They acting like the fool. But panicky people with nuclear weapons and the biggest prison system in the world and all of the gadgets that they have can do some very dangerous things. So one can feel good that the rulers are disintegrating mentally, but become very scared about what that mentally deficient person might do. So we have to understand that this anti-Russian campaign is a war cry. So who's picking up the chorus on this? One of the reasons that it's so dangerous is that people who would be thought of in previous times as allies of the movement, and I think that would include folks like Maxine Waters, for example, not necessarily part of the movement, but someone who could be called upon in previous eras to be maybe of some use. And yet here we have a Maxine Waters who believes now everything that the CIA and the NSA say, and forgot that she herself back in the 90s charged that the CIA was responsible for bringing crack into LA. She's forgotten this entirely because she's singing this war song about the Russians. The whole Congressional Black Caucus has joined in this anti-Russian chorus. And we have to understand it as a pro-war chorus that is singing a war song. And for their kind of resistance, the Democratic Party's kind of resistance, the anti-Russian theme is a song of resistance. So we have to understand when they get excited, what they believe is an anthem, is actually a call to war. And this presents us with real problems. It addresses that question that I raised early on. Who are the allies and potential allies of the people, and what forces can usefully be called part of the people's movement? What forces can usefully be called part of the real resistance? If you are resisting Russian collusion with Trump, then what you are resisting is a fantasy. And if you are simply resisting Trump, the idiot in the White House, then you are simply a tool of a Democratic Party strategy, and that strategy is to gain advantage. When I say that the Democrats are now the driving engine of war, that means they are the driving engine of US imperialism. And I'm also saying that they have nothing else to offer but war and imperialism. And even more so now that they have definitively become the party of the ruling class. War is not something that real movement folks should oppose just on principle because they don't like the idea of other people being killed. It's a matter of self-preservation. When the imperialists go to war and invest in war, they create corresponding structures of repression at home for those who might resist war. But when they decide that they are going to absorb all the public and private wealth of the home country, just as they have been doing with other countries all over the world with all their centuries of imperialism, then they must put another layer of repression on the existing mechanisms. So we should not see our opposition to war as just some kind of favor that we are doing to the people who are victimized by the U.S. war machine. The U.S. war machine requires that there be a corresponding repression of us here at home. That's the kind of function of the U.S. war machine that Maxine Waters has forgotten. So I think that I've taken up much more time than I've been allotted. But I also hope that it's clear that one of the things that I'm saying is that we need a rejuvenated anti-war movement in this country. And all of our movement politics must be an anti-war war politics, or else we are defenseless against this kind of strategy on the part of the Democrats, who pretend that they are somehow an alternative to the fascist-sounding and definitely virulently white nationalist forces in the Republican Party, but are themselves intent on a war policy that can mean the extinction of the entire human race. So I want to give a salute before I leave to Ajamu Baraka. Ajamu Baraka is not only the former vice presidential candidate of the Green Party, but he's also an editor of Black Agenda Report. And his campaign currently is to pull together a Black Alliance for Peace, so that there is an explicitly Black anti-war mechanism. Black folks, most people don't remember that SNCC and other early civil rights organizations were opposed to U.S. imperialism and the then not so big Vietnam War before there was a large anti-war movement, and that Julian Bond was ejected from the Georgia legislature because of his resistance to the war and to the draft. And we have to resume that position as the foremost opponents of war in this whole spectrum of a movement that we're building today. And so I salute Ajamu for bringing us back to where we need to be in the future. Power to the people.
Glen Ford, everybody. Let's play the tape. Roll the tape.
Hello, Sekul. How you doing, brother? I would love to be there next to you, but I am here away from you. But my love and my respect goes to you and to your wonderful and great compañera, Daki. I would like to take this moment to bring the issue of the political prisoners, the excarceration of the political prisoners, to the attention of every person that loves freedom, that loves justice, and to point something out. We need a campaign that transcend ideological differences in order to achieve the unity that will elevate the campaign to a position where the excarceration of the political prisoners can be achieved. I know how successful the campaign for my excarceration has been. We have 3 victories in a long struggle to free our political prisoners. We date back to 1979 when our 5 national heroes were excarcerated. We have the victory of 1999 when 11 of my co-defendants were excarcerated. And today we can say that all Puerto Rican political prisoners have been excarcerated, but we were able to come together, and thanks to the support that we received from different communities, from the Puerto Rican diaspora, from the international community, we have been able to achieve something that is very unique, the excarceration of all political prisoners. I wish that all of us working together, I hope that all of us working together will create the campaign that will bring our brothers and our sisters home. It is absolutely necessary to bring the political prisoners home. It is important because our youth will benefit immensely from the experiences that our political prisoners, all political prisoners, can bring out to the respective communities. And we should emphasize how the youth should be involved in this campaign. It behooves the communities, it behooves our youth, it behooves every freedom and justice loving person to be part of a campaign that will bring our political prisoners home. There's one Puerto Rican that I would like to mention at this moment, that's Ana Belén Montes. We Puerto Ricans are trying to make sure that she is incarcerated. We will include her in our support for all political prisoners. Hopefully that we can achieve our goals. There is an issue that I want to bring out, and that's the parade, what the corporations are trying to do with the Puerto Rican parade in New York. It is a move that is being undertaken, organized, orchestrated by colonialists who have historically allowed the United States to perpetuate colonialism in Puerto Rico. They have been the allies, they have been the ones who have administered or helped administer the colony. And they are threatened today. They feel threatened because they have a plebiscite organized for June 11th. And they think and they believe that by attacking the committee of the Puerto Rican parade, by attacking and using me as an excuse, they think that they will be successful. Corporations like Goya, like Yankee Stadium, like Yankees baseball team, like the Daily News, they have every right to do what they want to do with their corporations. They can take money away from the parade, but what they cannot do is dictate to the committee that is leading the parade. They cannot dictate to them, to the committee, what it has to do. And that is exactly what these corporations are trying to do, and they're doing on behalf of the colonialists in Puerto Rico, who are their allies, who are the allies of the corporations. They are the ones who are in cahoots with the corporations. They are the ones who created a fiscal control board that is trying to exploit to the maximum Puerto Rico and to destroy Puerto Rican identity, Puerto Rican culture, Puerto Rican language, and to take over Puerto Rico in a very inhumane way. And we need to get everybody who believes in freedom and justice to be there, to be present in the parade, and we will have a great parade, and we will show the colonialists that they have no room in Puerto Rico. Thank you, and freedom for all, long live this beautiful, beautiful struggle for a better and more just world.